Welcome to Crosspoint. An interactive program featuring ministers and leaders of the Christian community addressing the issues that are challenging the church today. Here's your host, Mark Taylor.
It is a sure sign we live in an abominable and challenging time that is beginning to see the heavy hand of government control upon us. Welcome to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. John Aman and Jerry Newcombe are my guests today. Well, today on Crosspoint, we've got a couple of guests here with us. We have John Aman and Jerry Newcombe from D. James Kennedy Ministries. We're talking about the government and A Fearful Master, a new book that they put out. And one thing, gentlemen, that D. James Kennedy Ministries does is they sure do have a lot of resources and offer a lot of information on what's going on in our world and around us. And so I want to thank you for everything you do and actually continuing to carry on what Dr. Kennedy started many years ago. I think it's really probably branched into more than what he even expected it would become, years later. So I'm looking at your book today, Fearful Master. Right in the foreword of the book, it says this testimonial offered under oath from the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Government quotes the FBI White House staff pressuring Twitter to censor opinions in which the government disapproves. And you say the Fearful Master gives credible and detailed evidence of what, not just that committee, but what a lot of them are doing all over our world to actually the people of America. So, gentlemen, just chime in here anytime you'd like to. And John, maybe we'll start with you.
Okay.
And John, sure, just kind of give us some insight into this.
Sure, thanks. We appreciate the opportunity to speak and to share with you and your audience about this. The book came about after, actually, I served as the editor of the book, and it came about after I took a look at what was said in the House Special Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government in their hearings, and they've held a series of hearings since January of this year, and had some very interesting witnesses, and really the testimony has been stunning. Some of it stems from the state of Missouri itself because of the information obtained from government agencies in the lawsuit that was filed by the Attorney General at the time, now Senator Eric Schmidt, along with the state of Louisiana, which has extracted some fascinating information about what the White House did in trying to impose its standards of truth on the social media platforms and on the nation. What amongst other things, we learned that just 3 days after the Biden administration came into power, they began to make demands on social media platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, like YouTube, calling on them to basically censor, deplatform, de-amplify posts that advocated vaccine hesitancy. So they didn't want certain viewpoints to be put out in front of the nation, and effectively wanted to become the nation's ministry of truth, to tell us what was true, what was not. And that's a gross violation of the First Amendment, which is why I personally am so glad that Missouri and Louisiana have brought this lawsuit, which is so important to the nation and to the future of free expression in the nation.
Well, one good thing that we had happen from all of that was when Eric Schmidt became the senator, the replacement for his position at, Attorney General is a fighter just like him. So he's already been jumping into the middle of the ring and stuff. And boy, we sure need more of those in our states. Jerry, in the book here, and this is something that's kind of interesting that maybe not all these type of books have, but very right here in Chapter 1, you got a picture of United States Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa. And actually, in that chapter is basically what he is saying in a hearing that they're actually having. Is that true? That's just kind of word for word of how the hearings went?
These are quotes. I mean, here's one of those quotes from Senator Grassley in that context in Chapter 1. I've never seen so much effort from the FBI, partisan media, and some of my Democratic colleagues to interfere with and undermine very legitimate congressional inquiries. And he gives some examples from that whole Russian hoax, that we were bogged down with for about 2 or 3 years. That essentially it was almost like they were trying to make it so that, this is an analogy I've come up with, it was as if the Trump administration for the first several months was trying to drive with the emergency brake on. So whatever Trump accomplished, in terms of revitalizing the economy and getting some terrific judges on the Supreme Court and in other high court positions, he was able to do despite all the lies being told about him. And some of the people involved in that must have known that they were lies. Now, there's a chapter in this book called Eyewitness to FBI's Transformation by a former FBI agent, Nicole Parker,
Correct.
Who worked there for 12 years. And she said that when she first signed up, the FBI was terrific. It was focused on fighting crime, upholding the Constitution, and protecting the American people. But now there is excessive outside noise drowning out the true mission. The FBI became politically weaponized, starting from the top in Washington, trickling down to the field offices. End of quote. And again, that's found in the same book, Fearful Master. And you could see that in the example of peaceful pro-lifers being threatened by the FBI as if they had engaged in some sort of violence or, some sort of criminal activity. It's crazy, but we see the weaponization of the FBI in our time, and it's awful.
Yeah. Now, John, in this book, too, and basically some of these chapters are basically just testimony of what's went on in Senate hearings over these
Correct.
issues like this. When you go into Chapter 2, you're hearing from U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. He's from Wisconsin, and he's talking with them, too, about what's happening. In fact, he says the use of the FISA against a U.S. citizen is what represents a fundamental threat to America's civil liberties, especially suspends the Constitution. So they're trying to address all these areas. Now, it does get, gentlemen, a little bit aggravating because we don't see a lot of things happening. There's a tremendous pushback against all this kind of stuff trying to be opened up, isn't there?
Yeah, there absolutely is, and the public isn't getting any help from the mainstream media whatsoever. The testimony that was offered by the associate of Hunter Biden, I'm trying to recall his name, but just
Devin Archer?
Devin Archer. He was largely ignored, and yet it's stunning and damning information that came out. So it is very much an uphill climb to get information about the truth of what is happening, staggering information, stunning information about the extent of the Biden censorship operation and other things that they have done that just demand more broad-based awareness. And that's one of the reasons that we produce this book, is because it actually is the testimony presented to the House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government. There's the chapters in here were I selected because of the information that you find in it. There's 11 chapters, and they are different individuals who are in a position to know from different angles what's happening in government. So we have 2 senators, 2 former FBI agents, 2 journalists who reported on the Twitter files, 2 attorneys representing Missouri and Louisiana in the lawsuit charging the Biden administration with violating the First Amendment with its censorship operation. And we also have 3 FBI whistleblowers that are featured in the book, Fearful Masters. And these whistleblowers tell about their own experience and what they've suffered as a consequence of the FBI's retaliation for making public what they know about the change that is taking place in the 2-tiered system of justice that is now being, I'm sorry to say, practiced by the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Well, Jerry, it's obvious they want to even silence some of the stuff what we're doing right now. They really don't want that out. I'm waiting for the days when the hammer tries to drop on some of this and put us where we're at today. And you know, it's one thing to ignore something, but it's another thing to especially want to ignore it and actually take and demolish it and say it's not anything when they know that it's true. This is connected to a lot of what we see happen in Russia and China and places like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I like to say this. I like bananas and I like republics, but I don't like banana republics, and I certainly don't want to see America become a banana republic. And it just seems that the whole weaponization of government, the way we've seen it in the last few years, is just so out of step with the American history and American tradition. In fact, there's a little conclusion in the chapter by Eric Schmidt, now U.S. Senator, as pointed out before, Attorney General for your state. And he talks about the history of the First Amendment and what the founders intended and what a great gift the First Amendment has been to the United States of America and really to the world as a model. I'll quote him, all right, from the book. Americans enshrined the First Amendment in our Constitution for more than 230 years for good reason and for times such as these. We cannot allow the Biden administration to infringe upon the freedoms that we cherish and that have been purchased for us by the sacrifice of millions of Americans. Freedom of speech is vital to our country and our people. In many ways, it is our pressure release valve. We must stop the Biden administration's threat to free speech so that America can remain the freest country in the world. And we see the assault on free speech, going beyond just the administration and liberal politicians and so forth. We see it in cancel culture. It's an amazing thing that Yale University, about a year or two ago, had a symposium, supposedly, on free speech or assaults on free speech, and some of the students on the left and groups from the left essentially shut it down, not allowing conservative speakers such as Kristen Wagoner, who is the president of the Alliance Defending Freedom, an organization that fights for religious liberty and other key rights for Americans. It was founded by D. James Kennedy himself and James Dobson, Marlon Maddox, Bill Bright, and Larry Burkett, and a couple others. They founded this to fight for religious freedom, and here the president of that group was not even allowed to speak. We see this in the example where Riley Gaines, the swimmer, the woman swimmer who's not willing to say that a boy who says, I relate as a female, should win all the trophies, when swimmers like her have sacrificed all their lives in order to win the kind of great stuff that they did, and now they're being told that it's a fair playing field, and it's not. And when Riley Gaines, for example, tried to speak in a San Francisco college, she was held hostage for 3.5 hours, and you can see, by the way, fantastic testimony she's giving at Josh Hawley, Senator, your other senator from Missouri. You've got some good ones there. That's great. Anyway, Josh Hawley is asking her to talk about how she was held hostage for 3.5 hours on this campus, and she was even, some people beat her because they were protesting her message saying that, a man is a man, and a girl is a girl, and a boy is a boy, et cetera. And yet this flies in the face of today's sexual orthodoxy where anything goes. And so, in effect, I think what we're seeing the left have a stranglehold on what is allowed to be said and what is not allowed to be said, and there will be heck to pay if you disagree, with that which is politically correct these days. And so that's where so much of this conflict, but to see our own federal government engaging this, as is documented in this book, Fearful Master, is just astounding.
Yeah. Now, John, before we go to a break here, this book, Fearful Master, how will people find out more about it, and also everything that the D. James Kennedy Ministries does? I know that there's been a lot of other books produced out there to help people.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, the title of the book is Fearful Master, the Federal Government's Ominous and Unprecedented Weaponization Against We the People. And you can obtain it at our website, djkm.org. Stands for D. James Kennedy Ministries, djkm.org. And it's available if you just look at the top banner. There's a top rotating banner where you'll see the book offered there. But yeah, we'd love to have people come by and take a look at that book and all the other things that are available there, including our television program, Truths That Transform, which airs weekly around the country.
All right, well, folks, stay with us, and we're going to be back with more right after this. This is Mark Taylor. If you miss a broadcast of Crosspoint, you can always go to our website at www.kneo.org and click on the programs page. There you can access the current Crosspoint program as well as the last 4 programs that have been aired. Never miss another Crosspoint program again. Go to www.kneo.org today. Welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor. My guest today is John Aman and Jerry Newcombe. They're from the D. James Kennedy Ministries. We're talking about a new book out called Fearful Master. It's talking about the federal government's weaponization against we the people here of America. And America was never founded that way, but it's turning that way, and it's because we have people in high places with authority that have taken that authority and taken it completely out of context of what our Constitution says it should be. And so I would have a question there, Jerry. How do we get it back? What are we going to do here?
Yeah, somebody once said, America's only real choice for the future boils down to 2 things, revival or ruin. And, you think about that and you think, oh, come on, that can't be that true. But survey the landscape, and we see things are really, truly a mess. During the dark days of the Civil War in March of 1863, President Lincoln issued a proclamation calling for a day of fasting and prayer. And he says, when you look at the United States, we have been so blessed and so favored as a nation, intoxicated with unbroken success. We become too proud to pray to the God who made us. And so he calls for a day of fasting and prayer. And something monumental happened in the war a couple days after that day of fasting and prayer. And so I think it's important that we really do see the need to get back to God. I love that story about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who, chronicled the great evils of the Soviet Union, godless system that killed tens of millions of people to force communism on them and engage in all these kinds of tactics where the government was in charge and you couldn't speak out and so forth. Anyway, Solzhenitsyn said that when he was a young man, or maybe even a young boy, he heard some peasants arguing. And one peasant said, in reference to all the unrest going on in Russia at the time, they said, "We have forgotten God. That's why all these things have happened." Solzhenitsyn said, "I've written books about the Soviet Union, the Gulag Archipelago." He won awards for this journalism and so forth. But he said he never found a better explanation for the evils that overtook Russia than that statement, "We have forgotten God. That's why all these things are happening." And can you not see a parallel to America? We have forgotten God. That's why we're in such a mess, and we even have, a government that's against us. It's amazing because that's not at all what the founders, intended for our nation.
Yeah, we do need voices out there that will speak up. John, I'm looking in the book on chapter 6, and it's talking about the censorship of the industrial complex. That has been a real weapon that they've been able to use against the people, is in the workplace, in how you get products or going to get products. This has become a new part of almost warfare that they are weaponizing against the people, not just in the government.
Yeah, that's so true. The scope of this censorship industrial complex is vast, and it extends, of course, to social media, but it also gets into our own private lives. I mean, if you will think back to what we were freely discussing and what we were not freely discussing back in 2020 and 2021, even possibly into 2022, were things about the efficacy of the vaccine. Now, there were certain portions of the American populace that had robust discussion about it, but certainly it was just excluded. It was marginalized in the mainstream, so-called, of news and commentary. And the Biden administration was doing all it could to push that kind of attitude towards these disfavored opinions that objected to the vaccines or the experimental drugs that were being promoted for use to control COVID and some of the things that were not being available. So we really, wherever you come down on the vaccine itself, the fact remains is that there was tremendous suppression of open and honest discussion and debate. It's really a startling thing, because we absolutely need free discussion and free exchange of ideas to be able to come to the truth. And ideas need to be tested, and they need to be tested freely in the public marketplace of ideas. And that is just astonishing what happened in those years under COVID, when, because of the threat of a very serious pandemic, discussion and free debate went away. And as I say, we now know, at least to some small extent, how the Biden administration drove that kind of suppression of free debate. The government under Biden has used its vast powers to censor free speech, to use social media outlets as their puppets, effectively, to throttle ideas that it labels as misinformation, but which are just ideas, facts, opinions that are protected by the First Amendment. They may be right, they may be wrong, but they have, all of us as American citizens have the right to freely express whatever those ideas are. And I think we've lost sight of that in the United States. And so that's why I'm so happy. I really am happy at what the state of Missouri, along with Louisiana, are doing to demand a reckoning on the part of the Biden administration for its violations of the First Amendment. Just to quote briefly from the judgment made by the federal judge who, on July 4th, issued a sweeping order commanding that federal agencies, a long list of federal agencies, have nothing to do with sending modification or censorship messages to social media organizations. In his order, the judge said, and again, this order was handed down on July 4th, he said that the present case arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in United States history. In their attempts to suppress alleged disinformation, the federal government, and particularly the defendants here, that would be the Biden administration, are alleged to have blatantly ignored the First Amendment's right to free speech. And so he issued the sweeping order. It's been set aside on appeal for now, his preliminary injunction. But that the whole matter will be tested in the courts. But this initial injunction and his willingness to hand it down in such a sweeping manner speaks to the egregiousness of what the Biden administration has done and the broad scope of it across all of government. It's interesting that Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, he said that the federal government is waging its fight against so-called misinformation across the federal enterprise. That's his quote, across the federal enterprise, which is to say that under Joe Biden, this effort to suppress opinions, to censor and deplatform ordinary Americans who hold ideas and opinions that are unwelcome to the Biden administration, that's basically a whole-of-government censorship operation under Joe Biden.
Yeah. Now, Jerry, you had mentioned earlier, what's it going to take? Well, we need a revival, of course, to break this, because in a way, to me, some of this is becoming more fearful in a way that, we're not going to be able to do this in our own strength. We're going to need some help, and it's going to have to come from heaven above. Where I'm sitting right now is where the roots of the Azusa Street Revival started, 30 miles from here, back when it started in Topeka and moved down here to Baxter Springs, and then went to Houston, and then ended up in Los Angeles. And, it can happen because I can remember, I've read books and, of what happened in this area when that all started, those early times of tent revivals going year round. I mean, in the winter, it'd be snowing, they'd be having a tent revival. And these warehouses were being cleaned out, and people were coming in, and they were holding and getting as many people in. They wanted to hear the gospel preached, and breaking ice on the second or third day of January on our Spring River over here, breaking the ice so 150 people could be baptized because they wanted to be baptized. I mean, that's what we need. Again, would you say so?
Yeah, we do. We need God. It's just true. I was hoping that the Asbury revival, the beginning of that, would spread, and it sort of seems to have perhaps petered out. But bottom line is, you can't force God to bring about revival. In fact, in the book of Acts, Simon the magician saw the work of the Holy Spirit. So he went up to Peter and he said, here, I'll give you some money. I'll give you silver and gold if you let me have some of that power. And Peter rebuked him, no, it doesn't work that way. Now, the Bible does say there is a stipulation for revival, and it is if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. The issue of humility, I think, is a huge one. Because, for example, in one of the things that Coral Ridge Ministries, D. James Kennedy Ministries does, I'm the director of something called the Providence Forum, which is a division of the ministry. And the goal of it is to educate people on America's Judeo-Christian roots. And Dr. Peter Lillback founded Providence Forum and gave it to the ministry because he wanted to make sure it would continue as he continues his work as the president of Westminster Seminary. So anyway, one of the things that we've done is we've made a series of films called The Foundation of American Liberty, and one of them deals with, it's called The Road to Independence, and it deals with revivals. And you can see, major portions of this at providenceforum.org. So The Road to Independence, there's a whole thing about revival, and there's an element there related to the issue of humility that's so key. I know that George Whitefield, coming over and preaching from England and preaching, he was used by God to spread that whole thing. But it all began under the humble work of a humble man, Jonathan Edwards, who was one of America's greatest intellectuals in the history of the country. The man was so humble that when he was, unfortunately, because of church politics, he was fired by his own congregation. And that happened, after the Great Revival began, and it began under his pulpit as he was preaching justification by faith in Jesus Christ alone. And anyway, what happened was his church fired him because of church politics, and then on a Saturday afternoon, he'd get a knock on the door. He'd open the door, and there was one of the church leaders, virtually hat in the hand, saying, I'm sorry, Reverend, but we have nobody to fill the pulpit tomorrow. Could you please come and preach tomorrow and lead the service? And he did. And that happened over and over and over again. What humility. There's a lot of hubris. There's a lot of pride in America, even in American church life, numbers and so forth. So I'm just basically saying we need revival, and it seems to me that humility and, of course, repentance is absolutely a huge key factor in that. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will heal their land.
Now, John, here in the book, there is so much information, and I want to continue on with you here in just a moment. But again, tell people how they can find out more about this book, Fearful Master, and also what all the other stuff that the D. James Kennedy Ministries offers.
Sure, be glad to. The book's title is Fearful Master, the Federal Government's Ominous and Unprecedented Weaponization Against We the People. Just published. It's the compilation of testimony presented to the House Subcommittee on the Weaponization of Government, and it's a fascinating array of details about what the government wants to do to us and is doing and has been doing to us, with testimony from the FBI agents, whistleblowers, and so forth. But if anybody wants to learn more and get a copy, they can go to djkm.org. That's djkm.org, and you'll be able to find it there on the home page on the rotating banner at the top.
All right, folks, we've got a lot more to talk about. We'll do that in just a moment. Stay with us.
Sometimes we can get stressed about life.
You might be having a bad day or something, but then it just reminds you, God's good. God's watching out for me. No matter what situation you're in, you can turn on the radio and just be reminded of it anytime.
Helping keep your eyes focused on Him. This is 91.7 The Word.
You're listening to Crosspoint. I'm your host, Mark Taylor. My guest today, well, I've got a couple of them here. John Aman and Jerry Newcombe from the D. James Kennedy Ministries. We're talking about a new book, Fearful Master. Folks, they put out a lot of good stuff just like this. You can get videos and DVD stuff, series, do a lot of stuff on the history of our nation and also on what's going on in our nation. John, as Jerry was talking there about the revival and what we need there, we mentioned the word humility a lot. And, that is, to me, one of the key things that people need in their lives is that area of being humble before the Lord. And, we don't see a lot of that these days.
Yeah, I agree. And I can vouch for my own life that I can, as I look back, I'm a little older now, as I look back, I can see that many of the issues and problems that I had in past days were either a consequence of or made all the worse because of my own arrogance. So I understand, I guess, I think all of us do, from a first-hand basis, how pride does indeed go before a fall. But as Jerry was talking about the importance of humility just a moment ago, a story came to mind that had been told me by a pastor friend, actually, who lives in my neighborhood, and we were just chatting, and he had been reading about revival and what are some of the preconditions for it taking place. And he quoted a writer, I don't know who it was, a writer on revival, who talked about the importance of humility and made the analogy that when we're seeking the power of the Holy Spirit, we're seeking the blessing of God, that blessing, like water, pools in low places. So as we humble ourselves, we enable God to bless, and he resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. And so the more humble we are, I would think that the more grace we'll receive. And so it's so true that humility is critical for all of life, but as we seek God's favor and a revival, which we desperately need, humility is in fact one of our necessities.
Yes, I agree completely. Jerry, in the book here, chapter 8 of the book, I'm looking at page 126. It's talking about the Federal Bureau of Investigations on deception and collusion. And here you're mentioning what's a hot topic today, the Hunter Biden laptop story and what's going on there. They tell me that there's more evidence there than anything that's ever been done in the history of our country, that more than Watergate or any other scandal that's ever happened, they have more evidence to prove the truth, and yet it's being suppressed.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Just think about that. When they've compiled statements from different people from the news media saying, oh yeah, the Hunter laptop story, that's that's Russian disinformation. And you hear one person after another saying it. And leaders, including Mr. Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State, said that. They came out publicly and said that this is all Russian disinformation. That Hunter laptop is not real. And only in the last, several months or few months have they admitted, yeah, it is real. And the information on it is so, damning. It's just loaded with smoking guns. And so anyway, it's so tragic to live at a time where there's a two-tiered system of justice. The Bible is very clear that justice must be fair. It must be meted out fairly for all. God hates unequal weights and measures. What does that mean? That, by the way, there's a statement even in the Constitution about unequal weights and measures. And Dr. Daniel Dreisbach of American University, who knows a lot about the Bible and founders, said that phrase comes directly from the Scriptures. That's why they put it in. Like so many aspects of our government at its founding, the Christian faith played a critical and key role. But what we have today is an unequal sense of justice. We see the classic statue of justice blindfolded so that justice would be meted out impartially and in total fairness. And instead, we see that no, it's not handled that way today, unfortunately, because of the weaponization of so many aspects of our government. Could I just give one quick example?
Sure.
Okay. In the last year and 3 or 4 months since the Dobbs decision, as it was being formulated, was leaked, okay? Since that time, there have been more than 300 attacks in the United States of America of churches and pro-life organizations. Most churches, in that case, pro-life ones, such as Catholic churches. Some of these attacks could be relatively trivial, but others were out-and-out firebombing or burning to the ground these pro-life centers, pro-life crisis pregnancy centers, et cetera, pro-life ministries. Okay, 300 attacks. Of those, only about 1 or 2 have there been some arrests and serious charges made. In other words, the government really hasn't done much to deal with that. At the same time, or around the same time, we've seen peaceful pro-lifers who've gotten arrested by SWAT team in a clear case of overkill because they engaged in the situation where they went to an abortion clinic to peacefully pray that women would not make that choice, and they've gotten arrested. I mean, the most famous one is Mark Houck, a Catholic author from Pennsylvania, and there was a SWAT team with about 15 to 20 police officers and so forth coming to his home, arresting him in front of his wife and his children and so forth. And again, everything was peaceful. Oh, and the judge threw out any kind of conviction against him because he was innocent. And so it's an amazing, though, example. It's like, wow. So the government is being weaponized and is really, honestly, is coming down on the side of the pro-abortion side of things as opposed to the pro-life perspective. To me, that is a crystal clear example of this government becoming indeed a fearful master. It's choosing immorality and enforcing immorality, against the will of the people. As John Adams said, our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other, and the left has turned that on its head today.
John, here in the book, Fearful Master, page 148, you're talking about it's not about the goal of censorship. Making a quote here, but in fact, as before in human history, censorship is not about truth, it's about power. So that's what they're after here is power. And, we need powerful leaders on our side speaking up. I've been praying for that more, that, oh, God, send some of those prophets that will speak into society today. And I know we have a few people up in our, halls of justice that are trying to make, where I'm, again, sitting right now, and this program's being broadcast into the town of one of our presidents, Harry Truman, lived and grew up as a boy here just down the road from us. And over here on the other side of me, you go a few miles and lays the body of Dwight D. Eisenhower out here in edge of Kansas, where I'm at as well. These were great men of God. I mean, God used these men to deal with real critical issues in our nation at the time. And yet today, it's hard to find those kind of men to speak.
Yeah, I truly agree with you. We have a lack of leadership. Some of it is bubbling up in the Republican Party, I think. But in the Democratic Party, they're, sad to say, almost walking lockstep in the path that Joe Biden and others like him are leading them. And that it's truly sad to see. There's not a lot of independent thinking. A lot of independent minds are not in evidence, I think, on the left. And to the extent they are, they're further to the left. What you were saying earlier about the censorship, it's not about truth, not at all. It's about power. In his commentary, this journalist, Michael Schellenberger, who was one of the Twitter Files journalists who exposed what was in them and brought them to the public, he made the point that the censors are not publicly engaging with their opponents in an open exchange of ideas. They aren't asking for a national debate over the limits of the First Amendment. Rather, they are creating blacklists of disfavored people and then pressuring, cajoling, and demanding that social media platforms censor, de-amplify, and even ban the people on these blacklists. So it is purely about power. It's not about truth, and they define for us what is truth, and then they use their power to impose that point of view on us by directing social media platforms to censor certain perspectives. One quote that I'd also like to share with you comes from the director of CISA, which is a federal agency charged with, actually I don't have the proper name of it in front of me, but this individual in a position of authority to monitor what we say and think makes the point that we're in the business of critical infrastructure, says the head of CISA. And the most critical infrastructure is our cognitive infrastructure. Building that resilience to misinformation and disinformation, I think, is incredibly important. So in other words, here we have a federal bureaucrat telling us that they have the responsibility to monitor what we think, to colonize our minds, to commandeer our ideas and ensure that certain disfavored ideas are not discussed in the public forums, which is outrageous. I mean, you can't get a more blatant violation of the First Amendment as far as the idea of it being expressed in what we have right here, and from a person in a position of power to so to speak, weaponize that power against we the people.
All right. Well, Jerry, time's starting to run out here on us and everything. I wish we could just keep going because there's so much to talk about here in Fearful Master and what's happening. But again, kind of head this up for us of where we're heading, what we can do as our part of it to help our politicians and our churches and everything else make a difference in dealing with this fearful master.
Well, I think it does underscore the fact that elections matter. And in fact, we even see, evidence in the book provided of election interference, quite frankly, which is awful. It should be, my big question, and I've often said this, if the left is so great, why do they so often have to cheat in elections? I'm serious. It's a common sense question, but there's truth to that, and it's very troublesome. A fair, open, honest elections should be the bedrock. They really are the bedrock of the American Constitution. And so, anyway, I think it's very, very important that people vote their biblical conscience. If Christians got more involved in the political process, we wouldn't have so much of a mess as we do, on our hands today. Hey, thank God for those examples where courageous Christians in the political field have made a difference. You look at Jim Jordan. Here's a guy, he's like a one-man army or whatever for God. Thank the Lord for him and his courage and his tough-minded questions and so forth. And thank God for Josh Hawley, your senator. So this is really important, though, that Christians get involved. And, I had this friend that she ran for Congress. She didn't win, but she wrote a book about the whole experience, and it's called Running Into the Fire, or Into the Fire. Terry Hasdorf is her name. So anyway, she said that when Christians get involved, especially in the primary, she said your vote in the primary, if I understood her correctly, was something like worth 10 times more than your vote in the general election. Now, of course, your vote in the general election counts. They all count. They count significantly. But when you vote in the primary, you have even more influence because a lot of people just don't bother. So I would encourage, definitely, in addition to prayer and revival and, all the things that we were talking about before that are so critical, even sharing the faith with those around us and so forth. The political process is not to be abandoned. The godlessness that we see among some of these who hold political office, and they have no regard for the truth. It's like somebody said, hey, if you honestly thought that that Adolf Hitler was on the ballot, and you as an elected official had you had the opportunity to nullify Hitler or, take Hitler out or that kind of thing. All of a sudden, when you realize that kind of mentality, then you see, oh, that's why all these people did all these things against Trump. They're treating him like as if he's Adolf Hitler or something. Seriously, it's really critical for Christians to show up and devote our biblical values so that we don't continue with this mess. We could make a huge difference. David Barton says that if Christians showed up and voted our biblical values, we could sway virtually every election. I love this one quote from Calvin Coolidge, and I'll let it go at that. He said, if good men don't hold office, bad men will.
That's true. That's true. John, again, tell us how to find the book, Fearful Master.
Sure, you bet. Thanks. The book, Fearful Master, The Federal Government's Ominous and Unprecedented Weaponization Against We the People, is available from D. James Kennedy Ministries, and you can just go to djkm.org. Again, djkm.org. Well, you'll find it on our homepage at the top rotating banner.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us today here on Crosspoint.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Folks, that's a wonderful interview today we had with John Aman and Jerry Newcombe. Great ministry there at D. James Kennedy Ministries. The reason their ministry has been so great over the years and has continued on after Dr. Kennedy left is because this other book in my other hand here, that's the Holy Bible. They've centered everything around God's Word, and it's built a great work for God out of the D. James Kennedy Ministries, but it does a great work in all of our lives. Folks, the Bible is inspired words of God, and it helps you no matter who you are. It accurately will help your life. It'll show you what to do and how to follow life just like you're supposed to. The Bible contains the most important words you're ever going to read and certainly ever follow. Be sure to join us again next time as we again discuss issues that are affecting the church. Have a great week and allow God to use you for His purposes so that greater things can be done. Make your life count in God's plans for eternity. I'm Mark Taylor.
Crosspoint is a program produced in Studio 101 at KNEO Radio. Not all of the views on Crosspoint reflect those of the management or staff of KNEO. You may contact the Crosspoint program at 10827 Highway 86 East, Neosho, Missouri 64850, or by email crosspoint@kneo.org. You can hear Crosspoint 4 times a week, Saturday morning at 1, Saturday afternoon at 2, Saturday evening at 9, and Sunday evening at 7. You can also listen anytime online at kneo.org.
Are you walking in everything God has for you? Hi, I'm Pastor Gary Culp, and I'd like to invite you to check out the Exceedingly Abundant Ministries podcast, available from the Sky High Podcast Network. This 30-minute weekly Bible study will give you time to grow spiritually and get to know God and His Word on a deeper level. God has more in store for you than you ever realized. Listen to Exceedingly Abundant Ministries today and learn about how God can do more with your life than you ever imagined.
Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri is proud to be sponsoring this portion of broadcasting on KNEO. Owned by Judy and Danny Harper, Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri specializes in French Bulldogs. For more information, the phone number is 417-628-3083.